Hello everyone and welcome to Beginner's Code. Today we are going to be looking at using a Python framework called Django to create the backend for a contact form. Okay, so the first thing that we're actually going to do is just create some folders so that we can actually store and create our Django environment. So the first thing we're going to do is we just cd into the desktop, and this is just going to be because that's where it's easy for me to store my new folders. So cd desktop, and then here I'm going to make a new directory using mkdir, and we're going to call it contact, and then we're also going to cd into contact once it's made. So now we're inside this contact folder or directory. We can now use the virtual environment to create a virtual environment, and this will basically just act as a way for us to store different packages and different dependencies that we need for this specific project, and that's because we don't want to get mixed up with another project. So we may need Django, the most recent one on this one, but Django 2.1 or something on a different one. So we can actually localize and store specific versions of a package for a specific project. So if you haven't already got virtual environment installed on your computer, what you can do is just pip install virtual env, and if you run that command, it should automatically install it for you. So once it's installed, we can just say virtual env, and then I'm going to call my virtual environment venv. So if we run this, we now have, if I do ls, we now have a folder or a directory inside called venv. So now we can just say source venv /bin /activate. And now if we run that, we now have our virtual environment activated, and it is in front of all of the terminal commands. So whatever we're typing, it's in front of, and that means that it is active. So now we have it activated, we can install the Django dependency. So if we run this, pip install Django, it will now start collecting everything that it needs to install it. And now we can actually create our first folder. So Django-admin, and then we can start project, and we'll just call it config. So if we run this, and now if I use ls again, we now have another folder called config. So now if I cd into that folder, and we can say Django-admin, and then we can start app, and we'll call it contact. So now if I ls again, we have config, contact, and a file called manage.py. So the manage.py file is basically just a way of getting the server running. It has a lot more information in that, but just a very, very brief overview. We can just say Python manage.py and run server. And now if we run this, we have a website link that we can go to. So if we copy this and then paste it, we now have a default Django page that we are able to see. So this means that our server is up and running and everything is working correctly. So now if we come back to our terminal and cancel this, we have all our files with now a database created because we have accessed the server. So now what we can actually do is just inside of our Visual Studio Code, we can just open the files that we want. So if I copy this and just drag it into Visual Studio Code, we now have our config, which contains multiple different files, including a settings, and then we have our contact, which also contains multiple different files, including our views, which we will be creating shortly. So what we need to do now is just update some of our settings. And the first thing we're going to do is just import another library, and this will be OS. And OS just allows us to use the operating system to use different commands. So next we need to, because we've created our contact file or folder or app, we now need to install it or add it to our list of installed apps so that Django knows what it's looking for. So we just type in contacts and it will automatically find the contact directory inside. If you are using similar names with different things, there are other ways of doing it, which will make it a lot more confined and 100% so that it's a lot more obvious as to what you're working with. But next we want to add in a static files directory. So if we just say static files and then underscore dirs, and then we're going to create a list, and inside of this list we're just going to have os.path.join, and then inside of this function we're going to use base underscore dir, which is a variable that was created up here when the file was already created. So it's just basically the base directory is a variable that will tell us where this file or where this project is based. So now we can join these two together. So we can join the base directory with a static. So now we have a static file directory added onto the base directory. So next we can actually start working with our front end. So to do this, what we can actually do is inside of the contact, we can create two folders. The first will be templates, and this will hold all of our HTML code. And then we can also create a static file. And then inside of this static file, we can create a CSS file. And we can also create a JavaScript file and an images file. And the static basically is just a way of holding different files and different images that we will actually be needing in our website. So now inside of this CSS folder, we can create a main.css. And then inside of the templates, we can create index.html. And now if I open my front end and then open with, if I just copy these onto here, so then we have our main.css, and if I copy all of this and then paste it into our main and save, and then index.html, copy all of this and then move over to my index.html and save, and now I can delete these two. So now we have our index.html. What we want to do is include a load static tag. So this will allow us to actually use the static reference when we are referencing either images, JavaScript, or CSS. And then what I mean by that is what you'll see here. So to access our static file, we actually need to pass in static and then a quote, a string which represents where the static file is located or the CSS file is located. So what we'll have is css/main.css, and then we'll save that. And then one last thing inside of the HTML file that we need to add is a CSRF token. Now this stands for cross-site request forgery, and it basically just enables, it basically just makes sure that everything that's sent by a user is encrypted and is not accessible by hackers. So we can just pass in CSRF_token and then save. We have all our front end stuff which we created in the first video. So if you haven't seen that first video, I will leave a card, should be up here somewhere, and you can go and check it out. So now that we have our HTML and our CSS in, we actually need a way to get to the actual file or the view that's going to show these, because at the moment if we run our server again, we still have our server set to this, so it doesn't actually do anything. So now what we can do is move over to our views, and our views is actually the place that's going to handle the way the browser interacts with our files. So what we can do is just create a function, and this function will be called home view, and it will take in a request, and then we will just return the render, and we will pass in request and home.html. So whenever this function is called, we are just going to render the request, whether it's a post or a get, and the HTML file, the index.html file, because it needs to link up with this file that's created here. So we are going to be, whether it's a post or a get, we are going to be rendering these two together. So now if we head over to our URLs for our config, we can now create an include. So we can import include from the Django.urls, and then here we can just say path, and we'll leave the path being empty, and that's because we want it to be the base route. So whatever the base route of the domain is, the user will be taken to that when they have opened the home page. So we will just pass in include, and then in brackets we'll pass in contact.urls. And now in the contact directory, you'll notice we don't actually have a urls.py file. So we can create a urls.py file, and then inside of this we can just say from Django.urls import path, and from .views import home view, and then we can say URL patterns is equal to a list, because we want it to match this. So it needs to match the same style, and then inside of this we can just say path with an empty string, so it will still be going to the base subdomain or the base route of the subdomain, and we'll pass in home view, and we'll just give it a name of home. Now we can run the server, so if I cancel out of that and then run it again, if you don't see any errors here, then perfect. If you see something like no module named contact.urls, then that means that the URLs file hasn't been created inside the contact. So it may just be a spelling mistake. You may have called it url.py or something like that. Just make sure that they all link up correctly. And now if we run this, we now have our front end form. So I can still fill stuff in, and then just say, hello, this is a test, and submit, but nothing happens. So now what we want to do is actually change our views.py so that we have a file or a view that can actually check to see whether or not it's a post or a get. And if it's a post, we're going to be doing something to send a mail or send an email to an email user saying that you have been contacted by someone. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll keep the base home view here. So we just need to import some more things. So from Django.http import request, and then from Django.core.mail we want to import send_mail, and then from Django.conf we want to import settings. And now we have our import sorted, we can actually now start addressing the main block of code that's going to be inside our home view. So we can remove that return line, because what we want to do is just use an if statement. So we're going to say if the request that is passed in, and we're going to say the dot method. So if the request's method is double equal to a post method, then we are going to create a new variable called message_name, and that will be equal to the request.post, and we're going to use the dictionary key of message-name, and that's because it's going to link up with this named field here. So whatever the user has inputted into this text input, we will then be grabbing and then storing it inside the message name. And then we'll be doing the same with message underscore email. So request.post, and we'll just say message dash email. Now remember to make sure they link up correctly, so message dash email and not an underscore. It's just good to double check. And then next we will be using message, and we will just say request.post, and we will grab the message from the text area. So text area's name message. And then finally, I'm just going to create a new variable called message mail, and this will be equal to the string of the message. So we'll just make sure that whatever is entered is a string, and then we are going to concatenate it with two sets of new lines, and then we'll just say from, and then we are going to have another string representation of the message underscore email. So we will have a message mail variable that stores the message, and then underneath it says from and then the email. So now we have some variables created, we can actually now use the send mail function. So if I say send mail, and then on the first line we'll say contacted by, and then we are going to concatenate again, so string representation of the message name. And then, so that will act as the subject for the email. And then we say message underscore mail, and that will act as the body. And then we'll say message underscore email, and that will act as the from. And then we need to pass in a recipient list. So this is a to list, and we are actually going to pass in settings dot email underscore host underscore user. And then we want to add a new thing called fail silently, and we'll just say false. And then outside of the send mail function, we just want to return the render, and we're going to pass in the request with index.html. And then we want to pass in the context dictionary, so message underscore name, and then message name, and then we'll do message underscore email, message email, and then message and message. So now we just need to add some commas in there, and if I save that, we now need to add in an else statement. So else, we are then just going to return the render of request index.html, but we will pass in an empty dictionary. So what will happen is if it's a post, we will find all this information and then send an email. And then if it's a get, so if the user's just retrieved the front end for it, if the user has literally just gone onto the contact page, they will just receive the request of the index.html file with no context dictionary. So now if we save this and head over to my terminal, I'm just going to cancel it and run it again just to make sure that everything's working correctly. Now if we come back to here, and if I just say test at gmail.com, and this is the test, submit, we still don't have anything. And what we do realize now is that we have a post request sent. So now that we have hit submit, we actually have something in our terminal saying that we have just submitted some kind of data. Now this is all well and good, but we haven't actually received anything, and this is the majority of times because we haven't updated our settings to say which emails we're actually going to be sending it from. Now in this post view, we have incorporated settings.email_host_user. However, we don't have a settings email host user. So at the moment, that is returning none. Now, what we actually need to do is just add in some email backends. Now, what we'll say is email_backend, and this will be equal to django.core.mail.backends.smtp.email_backend. Now, note the capital E and the capital B. Next, we can do email_host, and we'll just say that is local host. And then we'll say email_port, and this will be equal to 1025. And then we'll say email host user, and here we're going to pass in an empty string. Now we can say email host password, and that will also be an empty string. And then email use TLS, and we're going to pass in false. So this is how we can set up our email backends for Django using the development server. We don't actually need to have any specific thing linked to it. So now we can actually do the same again. So test, 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 run it, and we still have the same. We don't actually have a way of checking whether or not our email has been sent, because we're not actually receiving an email because we're using test accounts. So if we want to actually create our own email backend for Gmail, we can use the Gmail backend, which will basically look like this. So smtp.gmail.com, and then it will use port 587. So port 587 is always used for Gmail, but it does sometimes change. So if you are finding that 587 isn't working, you can just go onto Google and search Gmail port, and it will tell you which ones are most active. Now, the next thing that will be our host user. So this is your Gmail account. Now, this could look anything, but it will usually follow @gmail.com. And then once you've got your user account, you can find out your password. Now, for this, the best thing to use is an API password. It does require two-factor authentication, but it is a lot easier because it's a 16 character string, which the majority of people aren't going to be able to just guess. It's a lot more secure. It makes it a lot harder for people to hack, and it's a lot easier for you to just copy and paste. Now, we can access our API passwords very easily. All you need to do is just go onto your Gmail and then head over to account settings, and you can find it within there. But for now, it will just be a 16 character string. And then you want to make sure that you have true enabled for your TLS or SSL. And that's because where we're sending through Gmail, we need to make sure that it is secure. Now that we have our backend, whether or not it's for development or actual production, what we can do is to test this fully is if I create a new terminal and then just cd into desktop and then contact, and then if I source, just activate my virtual environment again, and then cd config. So now I'm inside my config file with my manage.py file. What I'm going to do is just create or use the development server that comes with Django and Python. So there is a development server which you can easily find on the Django documentation for email backends. There is a whole list of documentation that will help you all with the send mail and send mass mail. But if you come all the way down to the bottom, we have if I can find it, we have a development server just here. So what we can do is just say python-m smtpd, so the D stands for development, and then -n-c, and we'll just say debugging server as one word, and then localhost colon 1025. And if we run this, we now actually don't see anything. This can be slightly temperamental, the Python debugging development server. Sometimes stuff does come through, sometimes stuff doesn't. So the best thing to do is just test it out and let it sit there for a while, and hopefully you will retrieve everything that is sent here inside the terminal. So it's not actually sending an email. However, if you are using the Gmail version of the backends, then you will be able to send and receive emails. So if I just say, hello, this is a test, and then we submit. So this is all sent, the form has been sent, and now if we come back to the terminal, we don't see anything, which is slightly annoying. But if you give this a minute, I'll let the video run, and then once this is finished, I'll let it run. And if it does actually do anything, if we do receive anything in the terminal, I will carry on recording so that we can see this. However, if you don't see anything, or the video ends soon, then that's probably because I haven't actually received anything in this terminal. So if that's the case, then try and use a email provider of your own choice, whether it's Gmail or Outlook or whatever you want to choose, but give it a try and see if you can actually get your own email sent. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this has helped your understanding on how we can use Python for web development. If you liked what we've been through and you want to learn more, please drop a like and subscribe to my channel to keep up to date. In the coming weeks, I will be releasing a free 30 days of Python guide, so stay tuned and make sure you're ready to claim yours.